I remember the exact moment I realized I was different. I was 8 years old, standing in line at the school cafeteria, when the boy behind me whispered to his friend, "Look at that monster! How does she even fit through doors?" The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame as other kids turned to stare. That was the day I learned that my body wasn't just big. It was something that made people uncomfortable, something that made them cruel. Before we dive deeper into my story, I want to ask you something. If you're watching this video, chances are you felt different, judged or misunderstood because of your weight. You're not alone. Please consider subscribing to Shadows of Obesity. This channel exists to give voice to stories like mine. Stories that matter. Stories that remind us we're human beings deserving of dignity and love, regardless of our size. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I lived 23 years of my life weighing over 400 pounds, and how society taught me to see myself as a monster long before I ever believed it myself. I wasn't born obese. The baby pictures my mother keeps in her old photo albums show a normal, chubby-cheeked toddler with bright eyes and a smile that could light up a room. But food became my comfort early on, and comfort became my prison. My parents divorced when I was 5, and the custody battle that followed was brutal. I spent months being shuffled between relatives, while lawyers argued over who would take responsibility for me. During those uncertain months, my grandmother would feed me whenever I cried, cookies when I missed my mom, ice cream when I asked about Daddy, mac and cheese when I couldn't sleep. Food became love. Food became safety. Food became the one constant in my chaotic little world. By the time I started first grade, I was already noticeably heavier than my classmates. The school nurse called my mother with concerns about my rapid weight gain. But my mother was dealing with her own depression and financial struggles. She worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, and the easiest meals were often the cheapest ones. Boxed dinners, fast food, anything that could feed a growing child without breaking the bank or taking too much time to prepare. I remember being acutely aware that I looked different from the other kids, but I didn't understand why that made me a target. Children can be cruel in their honesty, and they wasted no time pointing out that I was fat, huge, gross. During recess, I would sit alone on the swings, watching other kids play games I was too slow to join, too big to fit into the playground equipment designed for normal-sized children. The worst part wasn't the name-calling. It was the way adults looked at me. Teachers would glance at my lunch and shake their heads disapprovingly. Other parents would whisper when they thought I couldn't hear, discussing my mother's poor choices and wondering how she could let me get like this. As if I wasn't a child standing right there. As if my weight was some moral failing that reflected badly on everyone around me. By 3rd grade, I weighed nearly 150 pounds. I know this because it was around this time that my mother started taking me to doctors, specialists, nutritionists, anyone who might have answers about why her 8-year-old daughter was the size of a teenager. The appointments were humiliating. I would stand on scales while doctors frowned and whispered to my mother about morbid obesity and serious health risks. They would poke and prod my body, discussing me like I wasn't there, like I was a medical curiosity rather than a scared little girl. One doctor suggested that I might have a thyroid condition or some other medical explanation for my weight. Blood test after blood test came back normal. My body was simply very good at storing every calorie I ate, and I was eating far too many calories for a child my age. But understanding the mechanics of weight gain didn't make it easier to stop. By then, eating wasn't just about hunger. It was about emotional regulation, comfort, and coping with a world that seemed determined to reject me. The bullying intensified as I grew older and bigger. Kids would moo at me in the hallways, call me whale, cow, beast. They would make jokes about earthquakes when I walked into a room. During gym class, I was always picked last for teams, and often the team that got stuck with me would groan audibly. I learned to fake illness to avoid PE, spending those periods in the nurse's office where at least I could cry in relative privacy. But the physical bullying was somehow easier to handle than the social isolation. I wanted desperately to have friends, to be included, to be normal. I would try to buy friendship with candy and snacks, sharing my lunch with kids who would accept my food but never my company. I became the class clown, using self-deprecating humor to deflect cruelty, making jokes about my own weight before others could. If I laughed at myself first, maybe it would hurt less when they laughed too. My mother tried her best, but she was fighting her own demons. She would yo-yo diet, dragging me along with her through various weight loss programs that never seemed to work for either of us. We would start each Monday with renewed determination, measuring portions, counting calories, promising each other that this time would be different. By Wednesday or Thursday, we would be back to our old habits, eating our feelings while promising to start fresh again next week. The shame of failing at diet after diet was almost worse than the shame of being fat. Each failed attempt felt like proof that I lacked willpower, that I was fundamentally flawed, that I deserved every cruel comment and disgusted look. I internalized the message that my body was wrong, that I was wrong, that I was taking up too much space in a world that didn't want me. By 4th grade, I was shopping in the adult plus-size section, wearing clothes that never quite fit right and never looked like anything my classmates wore. Fashion was something that happened to other girls, normal-sized girls who could shop at regular stores and find clothes that made them feel pretty. My clothes were purely functional, tents meant to hide as much of my body as possible, while still covering the basics. I developed coping mechanisms that would stay with me for years. I learned to enter rooms sideways to take up less space. I memorized which chairs had arms that I couldn't fit between. I became an expert at identifying which restaurants had booths versus tables, which movie theaters had movable armrests, which public spaces might have seating that could accommodate my size. My world became smaller as my body became larger, defined by the physical limitations that my weight imposed. The loneliness was crushing. While other kids were having sleepovers and birthday parties, I spent my weekends alone, reading books and eating snacks while my mother worked her second job. I created elaborate fantasy worlds in my head, where I was thin and beautiful and popular, where boys liked me and girls wanted to be my friend. But Monday always came, and with it, the harsh reality of my actual life. A life where I was becoming more and more convinced that I truly was the monster everyone said I was. Middle school arrived like a death sentence. If elementary school had been difficult, middle school was pure hell. By 6th grade, I weighed close to 200 pounds, and my body was changing in ways that made everything worse. While other girls were excited about developing curves, my body was becoming something I couldn't recognize or control. My mother had to special order bras for me from catalogs, and finding clothes that fit was becoming nearly impossible. The hallways at Jefferson Middle School felt like running a gauntlet every day. Kids would deliberately bump into me, claiming I was taking up too much space. They would make loud comments about needing to squeeze past the whale, or joke that they needed to go around the mountain. Teachers either ignored the bullying completely or offered weak reprimands that only made the torment worse once they weren't watching. But it was the romantic rejection that cut the deepest. I had developed a crush on a boy named Michael in my 7th grade English class. He was kind to me, treated me like a human being, helped me with assignments when I struggled. For months, I harbored secret fantasies that maybe, just maybe, he might see past my weight and like me for who I was inside. When the spring dance was announced, I spent weeks building up the courage to ask him. I'll never forget the look on his face when I approached him at his locker. It wasn't disgust exactly. It was worse than that. It was pity mixed with horror, like I had asked him to do something genuinely impossible. "Sarah," he said, loud enough for his friends to hear. "You're really nice, but... I mean, come on. You know I can't take you to the dance. What would people think?" His friends erupted in laughter, and I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, something deeper. My faith that I might somehow be worthy of love despite my body. I ran to the bathroom and cried until my eyes were swollen shut, then called my mother and pretended to be sick so I could go home. That night, I ate an entire large pizza by myself, followed by a pint of ice cream and whatever leftover cookies I could find in the kitchen. The food numbed the pain temporarily. But when I woke up the next morning, the shame was twice as heavy. Not only had I been rejected for my weight, but I had responded to that rejection by eating more, guaranteeing that I would get even bigger, even less acceptable. The summer between 7th and 8th grade, I stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. My mother was working longer hours to pay for my constantly expanding wardrobe, and I spent my days in front of the television, eating and hating myself in equal measure. By the time school started again in the fall, I had gained another 30 pounds. I was 13 years old and weighed nearly 250 pounds. 8th grade brought new humiliations. I could no longer fit in the standard desk chairs, and the school had to provide me with a special chair that squeaked embarrassingly every time I moved. During fire drills, I moved so slowly that I held up the entire class, earning glares from teachers and eye rolls from classmates. In the cafeteria, kids would watch what I ate with disgusted fascination, making comments about how someone my size could still be hungry. The worst incident happened during a school assembly. We were all filing into the auditorium, and I was trying to squeeze into one of the narrow rows when I got stuck. Actually stuck, wedged between the seats, unable to move forward or backward. The kids around me started laughing, then pointing, then calling others over to see. Teachers had to help pull me free while hundreds of students watched and whispered. I spent the rest of the assembly in the nurse's office, sobbing into rough paper towels while she made awkward attempts at comfort. My health was starting to deteriorate in ways that scared even me. I was constantly out of breath, even from minimal exertion like walking up a flight of stairs. My knees and back ached constantly from carrying so much weight. I developed sleep apnea and would wake up gasping for air multiple times during the night. My mother took me to another doctor who used words like pre-diabetic and dangerously obese, and warned about serious cardiovascular risks if I didn't lose weight immediately. But losing weight felt impossible. Every diet we tried seemed designed for normal people with normal problems, not for a 13-year-old girl who had been using food as emotional medication for nearly a decade. The hunger wasn't just physical. It was psychological, spiritual even. When I felt sad or angry or scared or lonely, eating was the only thing that provided relief, even if that relief was temporary and followed by crushing guilt. High school loomed ahead like an even greater nightmare. Jefferson High School had over 2,000 students, which meant 2,000 more potential sources of humiliation and rejection. I begged my mother to let me do homeschooling, but she couldn't afford to stay home with me. And online programs weren't as available then as they are now. The summer before 9th grade, I made a desperate attempt at weight loss. I had read about crash diets in magazines, and I convinced myself that if I could just lose enough weight fast enough, high school could be different. I started eating nothing but salad and diet soda, sometimes going entire days consuming fewer than 500 calories. The weight did come off initially, about 20 pounds in the first month, and I felt hopeful for the first time in years. But my body fought back with a vengeance. The hunger became all-consuming, occupying every thought. I would dream about food, wake up thinking about food, spend entire class periods planning what I would eat when I got home. The restriction created an obsession that was even more intense than my previous relationship with food had been. The binge that ended my diet was apocalyptic. I ate everything in our kitchen. Leftover Chinese takeout, a whole bag of chips, crackers with peanut butter, cookies, ice cream, anything I could get my hands on. I ate until I was physically sick, then ate some more. When my mother came home from work, she found me passed out on the kitchen floor, surrounded by empty containers and wrappers. That binge undid weeks of restriction in a single night, and it triggered a cycle of binge eating that was worse than anything I had experienced before. I gained back the 20 pounds I had lost, plus another 30. By the time I started high school in September, I weighed 280 pounds and felt more hopeless than ever. High school was everything I had feared, and worse. The building was enormous, and I was constantly late to classes because I couldn't walk fast enough between periods. Other students would get impatient behind me in the hallways, pushing past me with muttered complaints about slow walkers. I ate lunch alone every single day, usually in the library where I could pretend to be studying instead of facing the social minefield of the cafeteria. The isolation became total. While my classmates were going to homecoming dances and football games and parties, I spent my evenings at home, eating dinner in front of the television and going to bed early to escape the loneliness. Weekends were the worst. 48 hours of empty time to fill, with nowhere to go, and no one who wanted to spend time with me. My mother tried to help, but she was dealing with her own weight struggles and depression. She would suggest activities we could do together, movies, shopping, walks in the park, but I was too ashamed of my body to be seen in public more than necessary. We fell into a pattern of enabling each other's unhealthy habits, ordering pizza and eating it together while watching sad movies and promising each other we would start fresh tomorrow. By sophomore year, I was approaching 320 pounds, and my world had shrunk to the size of our apartment. School, home, doctor's appointments. That was the extent of my existence. I had no friends, no hobbies that didn't involve food, no dreams that seemed achievable for someone like me. I felt like I was drowning in my own body, trapped inside a prison of flesh that grew bigger and more confining every day. The breaking point came during my junior year. I was 17 years old, weighed 360 pounds, and something inside me had fundamentally given up. I stopped pretending that tomorrow would be different, stopped making promises to myself about eating better or exercising more. I accepted that this was my life, that I was destined to be the monster everyone said I was. My daily routine became a ritual of self-destruction. I would wake up already planning my first binge of the day. Before school, I would stop at the convenience store and buy enough snacks to feed a family. Chips, cookies, candy, energy drinks. I would eat them in my car in the school parking lot, finishing everything before first period started. During lunch, I would eat whatever I had brought from home, plus whatever I could buy from the cafeteria, plus anything left over from my morning binge. After school, the real eating would begin. I would drive through multiple fast food restaurants on the way home, ordering large meals from each one, and eating them in sequence while parked in empty lots. McDonald's, Taco Bell, KFC, Wendy's. I knew every drive-through menu by heart and rotated between them so the workers wouldn't recognize me as the girl who came in every day for massive orders. When I finally got home, I would raid our kitchen for anything else I could find. Leftover pizza, frozen dinners, entire loaves of bread with peanut butter. Nothing was off limits. I ate until I was physically sick, then waited until the nausea passed and ate more. Food had become my drug. and I was using it to numb every emotion, every thought, every moment of consciousness. My mother found me passed out on the bathroom floor one night after a particularly intense binge. I had eaten so much that I couldn't keep it down, and the combination of vomiting and my weight made it impossible for me to get back up. She had to call 911, and the paramedics struggled to get me onto a stretcher that could support my weight. At the hospital, they hooked me up to IVs and ran tests, while doctors whispered about severe obesity and life-threatening complications. That was when I learned I weighed 385 pounds. 385 pounds at 17 years old. The number hit me like a physical blow. I had known I was big, but seeing those digits on the hospital scale made it real in a way that mirrors and tight clothes never had. I was not just overweight or even obese. I was what medical professionals called supermorbidly obese, a classification that sounded more like a death sentence than a diagnosis. The doctor who treated me that night was brutally honest in a way that other medical professionals had not been. "Sarah," he said, looking me directly in the eyes, "if you continue on this path, you will not see your 25th birthday. Your body cannot sustain this weight. You are destroying yourself one bite at a time." But even facing my own mortality couldn't break the cycle. If anything, the fear and shame of that hospital visit drove me deeper into my addiction. I was too far gone to believe that change was possible, too convinced of my own worthlessness to think I deserved a different life. The monster everyone had called me had finally taken over completely. My senior year was a blur of missed classes, failed assignments, and concerned calls from guidance counselors. I was barely maintaining a C average and had stopped participating in any school activities. Graduation felt like an impossible goal, not because of the academic requirements, but because I wasn't sure I could physically walk across the stage to receive my diploma. The worst part wasn't even the physical limitations, though those were becoming severe. I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without stopping to rest. Getting in and out of cars required careful planning and sometimes assistance. I had to use motorized scooters at grocery stores, enduring the stares and whispered comments of other shoppers. Simple tasks like tying my shoes or picking something up off the floor had become monumental challenges. No, the worst part was the complete hopelessness. I had given up on the idea that I could ever be different, ever be normal, ever be worthy of love or friendship or basic human dignity. I spent most days in a fog of depression so thick that getting out of bed felt like a heroic accomplishment. I would lie there for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I was even alive when my existence brought nothing but pain to myself and worry to my mother. The isolation was complete by then. I had no social media presence because I was too ashamed to post pictures of myself. I had no friends to text or call. My conversations with my mother had dwindled to basic necessities. Grocery lists, doctor appointments, school requirements. We lived in the same small apartment, but we might as well have been on different planets. Food remained my only companion, my only source of pleasure, my only escape from the crushing reality of my existence. But even that relationship had become poisoned. I no longer enjoyed eating. It was compulsive, mechanical, joyless. I would shovel food into my mouth while crying, hating myself with each bite, but unable to stop. The voice in my head had become a constant stream of abuse. "You're disgusting. You're worthless. You're everything they said you were. You deserve this. You chose this. You are this." By the spring of my senior year, my weight had peaked at 402 pounds. 402 pounds. I was 18 years old and weighed more than most professional football players. The number felt surreal, like it belonged to someone else, some cautionary tale I had read about rather than my own lived reality. I want to pause here for a moment and speak directly to anyone watching this who sees themselves in my story. If you're struggling with weight, with food addiction, with the kind of shame and hopelessness I'm describing, please know that you are not alone. The comments section of this video has become a place where people share their own struggles, their own victories, their own moments of despair and hope. If you feel comfortable doing so, please consider sharing your story below. Sometimes knowing that someone else understands, someone else has walked this path, can be the first step toward healing. You matter. Your story matters. You are more than your weight, more than your worst moments, more than the cruelest things anyone has ever said about you. The day I graduated high school was both a triumph and a tragedy. I had managed to complete the bare minimum requirements, but I was too big to fit in the standard graduation gown. The school had to special order one for me, and even then, it barely closed. Walking across the stage to receive my diploma was one of the most physically challenging things I had ever done. By the time I reached the podium, I was sweating and gasping for air. The applause felt hollow, like sympathy rather than celebration. My mother cried that day, but I don't think they were tears of joy. I think she was mourning the daughter she had lost somewhere along the way. The bright-eyed little girl who had become this broken young woman, trapped inside a body that felt more like a prison than a home. That summer after graduation was the darkest period of my entire life. With no school structure to provide even the minimal human contact I had been getting, I became completely isolated. Days blended into each other in a haze of eating, sleeping, and self-loathing. I would go weeks without leaving the apartment, ordering groceries online and having them delivered so I wouldn't have to face the world. My mother tried to talk to me about college, about jobs, about some kind of future, but I couldn't imagine any scenario in which someone like me could participate in normal adult life. How could I go to college when I couldn't fit in lecture hall seats? How could I get a job when I could barely climb a flight of stairs? How could I build any kind of life when my own body had become my greatest enemy? The physical pain was constant by then. My knees screamed with every step. My back ached from carrying so much weight. I had developed severe sleep apnea and would wake up dozens of times each night, gasping and choking. My skin had broken down in places where it rubbed against itself, creating painful sores that wouldn't heal properly. I was living in a body that was actively trying to shut down, failing system by system under the burden of my weight. But somehow, even at 402 pounds, even at my lowest point, even when I was convinced I was beyond saving, a tiny spark of something, hope maybe, or just stubborn refusal to give up entirely, continued to flicker somewhere deep inside me. I didn't know it then, but that spark was about to change everything.